but it doesn't happen unless we reinforce it. Okay, flute, which is where all of this started because of the flute episode. I wish I had some tape in here. I go through, and with flutes, we also have a chant. And the chant that we will eventually learn goes, top, thumb, one, squish. And this is the most important thing that I teach my flutes about hand from the very beginning. The squish point, there's only 3 things that holds up a flute. The first one is your chin. Your chin holds up the flute. And then you only have 2 other contact spots. This part of your hand right here, this is what holds up the bulk of your flute, and where your right thumb is. That's it. That's all. That's why C sharp works. Because if we have a good contact spot at our chin, right here, which is what holds the bulk of the weight of the flute, and this. Now you will see, I still have 2 kids in my flute class that I have to remind about the squish point. The first day that we learn how to do this in flute class, I go through and I mark them right here. And I say, that's the part of the flute that is, of your hand that's going to hold the flute. That's the part of the hand that is going to be in contact with the body of your flute. And I go through and I will put a piece of tape. I go through and I hold the flute. I figure out where that squish point is, and then I put a little piece of tape. You can use moleskin if you want something that's more squishy and textured. I know people that will use corn pads. Because there's a little divot for them. So I usually just put painter's tape right there because it comes off nice and clean. But I'll put it right there, and then we practice going thumb, one, squish. And then we practice squishing that mark that I made on their finger up against that spot that I just put the tape. And again, we go thumb, and yeah, you saw I'm using top thumb. Thumb, one, squish. And then they go through and they show their neighbor, and their neighbor watches that the mark that's on their hand is squishing against the body of their flute, squished against the tape on their flute. And that tape, again, if you're not a flute player, it just goes on the body kind of right in between where the 1 key and their thumb is, just right there. That's where you would put the tape. Thumb, 1, squish. And then skip 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and our pinkies are floating. And I do not let this pinky go down below. I do not let this pinky go up. The pinky has to stay over their A flat key. And this pinky is just floating for right now, but of course we all know it's going to plug in right on top of that key for like forever until you get to D, which for us is a while because we start up at the top. But you know that because of the podcast episode. So again, that whole little chant goes thumb, 1, squish, skip 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and my pinkies are floating. You have to do dramatic stuff with them. They love it. Obviously, when your kids have holes in their flutes, it's really easy for them to know where to put their fingers, unlike saxophone that has 1.5 billion pearls. Yes, you should steal their plugs. Keep them, but you should steal them. Your kids are capable of covering the holes. Do you think that your kids are capable of covering the clarinet holes, but for some reason not the flute? That's dumb. We can cover the holes. Now, the reason I say save them is because occasionally, very rarely, will I have a kid that I end up plugging their ring fingers. But I only plug them for a small amount of time, and then I steal them. I'll steal this one again first, and I'll steal this one. Guys, if your kids are using good hand position, they will reach the holes. If you would like to use an offset flute or an offset G flute for your kids because you feel their hands are going to fit better, that's fine. I have legitimately only had a very tiny few of our kids throughout the years that cannot reach an inline G. I prefer inline G for my kids because it does require them to use good hand position from the very beginning. Okay, let's talk about the right thumb. The right thumb is so wildly important. First of all, the thumb does not go underneath the flute. It does not go directly underneath this. Your right thumb should go behind the flute. This is a balance point, but it's more for balance than it is for weight. Your thumb should be behind. So if you can, let me see if I can show you. There we go. Do you see how my flute, or my thumb is not directly underneath? It's behind a little bit. Now, I wish I had brought this in here. Some of our kids use those bopeds, or there's something called oh my God, what is it called that I use? Thumb port. That's what it's called. Both of them are little devices that you clip onto the body of the flute that gives you, it lets them open up their hand a little bit more. It gives them a platform to rest their hand on. I love the thumb port because it actually sticks out a little platform behind the flute that really kind of, it gives you a little more stability on there. They're kind of expensive. I want to say they're like $40. The bow pads are much cheaper, but again, it gives them a platform and a flat spot where their thumb goes that feels good. But again, it goes behind. What we are looking for, and the reason the thumb has to go behind is because the hand should go behind the flute. The hand doesn't go under the flute. If you can see the palm of their hand, their first of all, their wrist is going to have to do really bad things, which I've talked about on the podcast for years. I had horrible wrists by the time I got to college because I'd been cocking my wrist for so long. This is all stuff that I learned after the fact, and so I'm 100% going to impart this wisdom not only to my students, but I'll tell anybody. Guys, this wrist should be straight. That wrist should be straight. This wrist should be straight. And the way you make the wrist straight is by getting the thumb behind the flute. That allows your fingers to be nice and relaxed and straight. It keeps the wrist straight so that you're not causing repetitive injury to those tendons in here. But it aligns the fingers more properly. So again, it should be behind. So I will go through, and this is another place that I will tape on all of their flutes. I go through and I put my hand on there, making sure that my thumb is slightly behind the flute instead of underneath. I'll put that little piece of tape, and I put it so that the tape is long enough that they could either put their thumb under, which we know is not under based on what I just told you. It's either under the 4 or it's between the 4 and the 5. Those are their only two choices. It can go under 4 or it can go between 4 and 5. You know where it can't go? Under 6. And every show I show the kids what that looks like, and they're like, ha, ha, ha. And I was like, you're laughing now, but one of you is going to do it. And sure enough, happens every year. Or even worse, the kid that does this. The thumb does not go under all of these keys that don't have holes. It goes either under 4 or between 4 and 5. So you just give them a piece of tape small enough, that's skinny enough, that it should be right up here that is holding the flute. Again, it's a lot like what saxophone and clarinet does. It's almost like the corner of the thumb that is going to be holding the flute behind the flute so that it straightens out the wrist and it lets the fingers relax and be, rounded and straight as opposed to, which is what we get when kids put their thumbs in weird places. I tape here for their squish point, mark on their hand. 1, squish. Skip 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And our pinkies are fluting, and my thumb is on the tape. And you will still hear me. Here we are on October 5th, and I'm still saying, Andy, get your thumb on the tape. Probably should have called him Walter. It's Andy. But I'm still having to remind them the thumb needs to be on the tape. The thing about tape is that, especially when you use painter's tape, it's slightly textured, so they have a tactile reminder where they are. Moleskin is a little thicker and more obvious. So I used to use moleskin, and I'm just honest, I've gotten lazy. I haven't gotten to Walgreens to buy it, but I have the painter's tape. Moleskin because it gives them that feel point. Thumb ports are expensive versions of that. Bow pads substantially cheaper thumb ports. And it helps them get the in there. That's basically what I'm doing right now. I am horses behind about the hands. We're doing partner work in Flute now where partner is playing to a stand of their music stands. I have the phone on the right now. I have partner 2 in front of the music stand watching and the kids to tap the kids that are going off. So if you have a kid, fingers were doing, then the kid would go tap and they would down to where it's supposed to. One thing that you prove to your children that they do not need these extra finger points. I have kids that want to their hand on the we're not any files. We have kids who do all of the back. For example, this is one of the starting with B flat. Shows them from the very stuff. Have all like B flat, 1, A. Lift up that you're not using. You can. You're still using the flute. Any of these. Okay, relax. If your kids have weird spots, tension in their, as long as are, they're easily going to where they are. Require them to spread out their goals. You can require the teacher. You can require kids will. You are reinforcing them every day. And have them understand how they're crazy doing. How, hey, thumb is over the tape. My hand looks at my fingers. My fingers bring them back. And require they will do that. How the hand class are, but when they so it's not now. So with this for what makes us with those finger up, they shape and that some have and are very up to us